Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The wind was rising over the north when the stranger came. It was a hard wind, howling across the moors and biting through the bones of men who called that land home. The snows had begun early that year, and Winterfell's hearths burned longer than they had since the long night. In the deep cold, the ravens flew heavy with frost, their wings stiff as they carried tidings to the Lord of Winterfell. Jon Snow read those tidings in silence. He stood at the battlements, his black cloak stirring in the wind, and frowned at the seal stamped into the wax. It was no sigil he knew, an emerald serpent coiled around a silver sword. A sellsword lordling, Davos Seaworth muttered behind him. Or some fool with gold enough to mint himself a banner. Jon's eyes narrowed. He calls himself Sir Rhaegal Vaelor, he said quietly. He claims descent from the old blood of Valyria, and says he comes not to serve, but to rule. Davos spat into the snow. Another Targaryen pretender. Perhaps, Jon said, but this one marches with 5,000 men, and word has it he doesn't bleed. At that, Davos looked up sharply. Doesn't bleed. They say he took an arrow to the heart at Deepdown and fought on, Jon replied. That he waded through fire at Torrhen's Square and came out untouched. The small folk call him the Immortal Knight. Jon turned his gaze northward to where the faint glimmer of aurora shimmered over the frozen hills. The war for the Iron Throne had ended years ago, yet peace in Westeros was a brittle thing. Rumors of Rhaegal's advance troubled him more than he cared to admit. Sansa came to him that evening, wrapped in furs the color of winter wheat. I heard the men talking, she said, about the Immortal Knight. Is it true? Jon nodded slowly. He's taken 3 keeps already. Lord Glover's men joined him after he spared their kin. Spared? She asked. He kills only those who resist. The rest he welcomes beneath his banner. He says he means to purge weakness from the north. Sansa's eyes darkened. Then he means to make war on all of us. Jon looked into the fire. He claims he fights for a new order, one where strength rules and no southern crown holds sway over the north. Strength, Sansa said softly, a word that hides 1,000 cruelties. For days, the snows fell without pause. Ravens came and went, carrying fearful words from the outer lands. Rhaegal's army grew with every victory. Some lords bent the knee willingly, drawn by his promise of freedom from southern rule. Others fell by the sword. Then came the night a messenger arrived at Winterfell's gates, a boy half dead from cold, bearing a scroll sealed in green wax. Jon broke it open by torchlight. To the Lord of Winterfell, son of the bastard of Winterfell, brother of the Dragon Queen, I come to cleanse the north of false kings and hollow honor. You who call yourself warden, you who serve a throne of ashes, stand aside or be made to kneel. I am Rhaegal Vaelor, born of fire and never dying. The north is mine by right of conquest and blood. The signature gleamed like a wound across the parchment. Jon crushed the letter in his fist. Then we march, he said. By dawn, the banners of the direwolf were flying once more. Armies gathered beneath the walls of Winterfell, men of the north, weary but proud, with frost stiffening their beards and vengeance in their eyes. In the great hall, Jon stood before them. We've fought worse than this man, he said. We've faced the dead and lived. We'll face this one too. but as the torches flickered against the stone, an unease settled among the gathered lords. There was talk, whispers that Sir Rhaegal could not be slain by any mortal means. On the third night, as the wind howled through the godswood, Jon found Bran by the heart tree. His brother's eyes were pale and far away, fixed upon the carved face of the old god. "You've seen him," Jon said. Bran nodded slowly. "A man wrapped in shadow. He was not born as other men are. There is power in him, dark and old." "What kind of power?" Jon asked. Bran's voice was distant. "He's bound to something that does not die. A god once worshipped before the first men came. It whispers in his blood, gives him strength no blade can pierce." Jon felt the cold reach deep into his bones. "Then how do we stop him?" Bran turned his head, and for a moment, the flicker of torchlight caught the faintest trace of sorrow on his face. "You don't. Not with steel. To defeat him, you must make him mortal again." Jon looked away, the firelight glinting off the edge of Longclaw's blade. He had seen men who thought themselves gods before. He had seen what pride could do to mortal hearts. Still, the thought haunted him, of a man who would not die, a man driven not by honor, but by hunger for dominion. And somewhere in the north, beyond the frozen rivers and white forests, that man marched steadily onward, his armor glinting green beneath the pale sun, his eyes as cold and cruel as the winter sky. Sir Rhaegal Vaelor, the proud immortal villain, was coming for Winterfell, and Winterfell would not yield. Snow fell thicker by the day, veiling the world in white silence. The north lay frozen in uneasy anticipation, its people whispering prayers to gods old and new. Yet beneath that quiet dread, armies moved. From the marshes of the Neck to the mountains of the Vale, riders carried word. The immortal night marched on Winterfell. Sir Rhaegal Vaelor's host was unlike any Westeros had seen since the War of the Five Kings. His men bore no common heraldry. Each house that bent the knee kept its own sigil, yet every banner was marked with his green serpent entwined about a silver sword. The serpent's eyes were painted gold, and some swore that in firelight they seemed to glimmer like living things. Rhaegal himself rode at the head of his host. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and cloaked in scaled armor that shimmered faintly as if forged from the very hide of a dragon. His helm was wrought in the likeness of a serpent's head, and his sword, an elegant Valyrian steel blade he called Vermithor's Fang, caught the pale northern sun with deadly beauty. Those who had seen him in battle spoke of him with a shuddering awe. At Torrhen Square, a spear had run him through. Still he fought. At Barrowton, a fire meant to consume his siege towers instead seemed to part before him, the flames bending away as though fearing his wrath. His enemies broke, not merely from his sword, but from the certainty that they faced something beyond mortal reckoning. Yet for all his might, Rhaegal was not reckless. He moved with purpose. In every captured holdfast, he left order where there had been ruin. His laws were cruel but fair, his punishments swift but predictable. He gathered men who had lost faith in lords and kings, promising them a realm where worth was measured by strength alone. "The weak perish," he told them, standing upon the walls of Deep Down with snow swirling about him, "and the strong rule as nature intended. The north will be reborn, tempered by fire and frost alike." That night, alone in his tent, Rhaegal removed his helm and stared into the bronze mirror set before him. His face was striking, handsome once, but now marked by faint silver veins that pulsed beneath the skin like living lightning. His eyes glowed faintly green in the candlelight. He touched his chest where an arrow had pierced him weeks before. The wound had closed without scar. The god had kept its promise. In the darkness, he whispered, "We are not done yet, Old One." A voice answered, not aloud but within him, "Never done. You are the vessel of my will. The fire of immortality burns in your blood. Rule them, break them, make them kneel." He closed his eyes. The whispers had become a constant companion, a sound beneath his thoughts like the sea against stone. At times it comforted him. At others, it filled him with dread. Far to the west, Jon Snow prepared Winterfell for siege. The courtyard rang with the clash of steel and the barked orders of captains. Smiths worked through the night reforging old blades, and the castle's meisters turned their hands to making wildfire traps learned from old Lannister designs. Sansa moved through the keep with calm command, rationing grain, organizing refugees, and ensuring that the sick were kept warm. But in her chambers, she confessed her fear to Jon. "He has power we do not understand," she said, her voice low. "And if he truly cannot die, then we'll find what makes him live," Jon answered. "Bran said he's bound to something. Ancient. If that's true, it can be broken." Bran's ravens had flown north again, and through their eyes he sought what lay hidden in the frozen waste. The remnants of the old god's power. The whispering spirits that once walked before men. He saw flashes of something beneath the ice. A cavern carved with runes older than the first men, and a faint green light pulsing like a heartbeat. When he woke from his trance, his voice trembled. "He has found the shrine of Vaynor," he told Jon. "It's where the old god sleeps, the one men forgot. That's where his immortality was forged." Jon understood then that steel and fire would not be enough. They would have to cut the bond between Rhaegal and the god that sustained him. By the end of that moon's turn, Rhaegal's banners were seen along the King's Road. His host approached like a slow, devouring tide. The first skirmishes broke out near the last hearth, where Lord Umber's men stood defiant. They fought bravely, but when Rhaegal entered the fray, no blade could harm him. He strode through blood and flame like a figure from some grim legend, his sword gleaming, his enemies falling before him as wheat to the scythe. When word of the Umber defeat reached Winterfell, the mood darkened. Yet Jon did not waver. He summoned his war council, the firelight gleaming on the maps spread before them. "He'll come from the east," Jon said, tracing the path with his gloved finger. "We'll meet him at the Wolf's Den, where the river's narrow. If we hold that crossing, we can stall him long enough for Bran to reach the shrine." Sansa frowned. "You mean to send him alone?" Jon nodded. "No one else can do it. Bran knows where to look, and he can move unseen. If we can break the curse that keeps Rhaegal alive, he'll fall like any man." The council agreed, though uneasily. As the lords dispersed, Davos lingered. "You've fought the dead before," he said softly. "How's this any different?" Jon looked toward the window where snow drifted past the glass. "The dead didn't choose what they were," he said. "Rhaegal did. That makes him worse." When dawn came, the armies of the north rode out beneath gray skies. They met the enemy in a valley shrouded with mist, where the wind carried the smell of iron and pine. The ground was hard as stone beneath the hooves, and the silence before the first charge was unbearable. Then horns sounded. The clash was thunderous. Steel met steel, shields splintered, men shouted, horses screamed. Jon fought in the thick of it, Longclaw cutting through the melee with savage grace. Around him, the direwolf banners waved defiantly. their white fangs gleaming crimson with blood. And then Rhaegal appeared. He cut through Jon's vanguard like a storm, his green armor glinting through the smoke. Every arrow seemed to veer from him, every sword glance off harmlessly. When Jon faced him at last amid the chaos, it was as though time slowed. "You are Jon Snow," Rhaegal said, his voice calm, almost regal. "Son of ice and fire. I expected more." Jon lifted Longclaw. "And you are a man who's forgotten what it means to die." Their blades met with a sound like thunder. Steel screamed, sparks flew, snow turned to steam. Rhaegal struck with inhuman strength, driving Jon back step by step. Longclaw bit deep into his side once, but no blood came. The wound sealed before Jon's eyes. "You cannot kill what has already conquered death," Rhaegal said, his eyes glowing with unnatural fire. Jon's arm trembled, his breath coming ragged. "Every curse has its end," he growled. Rhaegal smiled faintly, almost pitying. "Then find it, if you can." And with a sweep of his blade, he sent Jon crashing into the snow. When he turned to strike again, the horns of Winterfell sounded in the distance. Reinforcements poured down the ridge, driving Rhaegal's men back for the moment. He did not pursue. Instead, he looked to the north where the mountains met the sky, as if hearing something distant and ancient calling to him. The god whispered again, and his eyes flashed gold. "They are coming for the shrine," the voice said. "Protect it, or all shall be lost." Rhaegal mounted his horse, the serpent helm gleaming with frost. "Then let them come," he murmured. "I will show them what it means to challenge the Immortal." And as the snows swallowed his retreating host, the war for the North entered its darkest hour. The war's shadow stretched far across the north. Smoke rose from villages once peaceful, now trampled beneath the boots of men who followed the serpent banner. Yet, amidst the ruin, hope still smoldered faintly at Winterfell. Jon Snow lived, though his body bore the marks of his battle with Sir Rhaegal. His ribs ached with every breath, and his sword arm trembled, but his will was unbroken. The great hall had grown colder than ever, even with fires roaring in every hearth. Lords and ladies crowded within, speaking in low, grim voices as they awaited word from Bran and the small band who had set forth toward the shrine of Vaynor. "They should have reached the foothills by now," Sansa said, her hands clasped tightly before her. "If the snows have not buried the path." Jon nodded. He sat at the high table, his face pale with fatigue. "Bran knows the way. If any can find the shrine, it's him. And when he does, Rhaegal will bleed like the rest of us." Yet in his heart, he feared what that meant. Bran's visions had grown stranger of late, haunted by images of writhing roots and serpents coiling through ancient stone. The god of the shrine was no nameless spirit. It was something old and vengeful, a power that fed upon mortal pride. Far beyond the walls of Winterfell, Bran Stark and his companions rode northward through the frozen wilds. Meera Reed led the way, her spear tipped with dragon glass, her breath fogging the air. 2 of the Night's Watch rode beside her, men sworn to secrecy, their cloaks black and stiff with frost. Bran was carried upon a sled behind them, his eyes half-lidded as he drifted between the waking world and the visions of the weirwood. Each night the wind howled like wolves, the trees grew sparse, and the land turned strange. Great stones jutted from the snow, carved with faces worn by centuries of ice. They were the remnants of the children of the forest, the last marks of an age when gods still walked beneath the moon. On the 4th night, Meera stopped. Ahead lay a ravine veiled in mist. A faint green glow pulsed within, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. That's it, Bran whispered. The shrine of Vaynar. They descended cautiously, the snow crunching softly underfoot. The air grew warmer as they neared the light. The walls of the ravine were carved with runes so ancient even Bran could not name them. At its heart stood a great slab of black stone, slick with frost yet faintly steaming, as if something beneath it breathed. Mira set her torch upon the ground. What do we do now? Bran's eyes rolled back. When he spoke, his voice was not his own. It was layered, echoing like the whisper of wind through leaves. The god bound itself to Rhaegal through blood freely given. To unbind him, the blood must be taken back. Mira frowned. Then we have to kill him? Bran's head tilted. Not by steel. He must bleed at this place. Only then will his soul return to mortal flesh. Before Mira could reply, the ground shuddered. A deep groan echoed from the stone, and cracks spidered across its surface. The green light flared brighter, and a voice rose from below, low, ancient, and full of contempt. You trespass upon the heart of my dominion. The words thrummed through their bones. Mira clutched her spear tighter. We mean to end what you began. The voice hissed like fire meeting snow. You would undo perfection? I gave him what all men crave. He came to me in the dark, proud and burning. He sought eternity, and I granted it. Now you seek to steal it back? Bran's voice steadied. Immortality without soul is damnation. He will drag all the north into ruin before he yields. The green light rippled, coalescing into the shape of a vast serpent formed of mist and flame. Its eyes were pits of molten gold. Then let him come. He is my vessel, my chosen. If you would break him, you must face me. The vision shattered as suddenly as it had come. Mira knelt beside Bran, whose breathing was shallow. He knows, Bran gasped. Rhaegal knows we're here. Miles away, in his command tent, Rhaegal stirred from uneasy sleep. He had dreamt of the shrine, of a shadow with 1,000 eyes watching him. When he rose, frost clung to his armor, though the brazier burned hot beside him. The god's voice whispered within his skull. They approach the heart. The blood must not be spilled there. Rhaegal's fists tightened. Then I shall go myself. He left before dawn, taking a company of his fiercest knights. They rode hard through the frozen passes, their torches flickering like stars in the endless white. At Winterfell, Jon Snow gathered his captains once more. If he's riding north, he said, we cannot let him reach Bran. We'll ride to intercept him. Another battle? Davos asked. We've lost too many already. Jon's eyes hardened. If he reaches that shrine, everything we've fought for ends. By sunset, the direwolf banners were moving once more through the snow. In the days that followed, the storm worsened. Snow came down in great sheets, erasing all tracks. Yet both armies pressed on, one to destroy, the other to protect. Bran and Mira reached the mouth of the shrine as the storm broke. The black stone pulsed faintly beneath the snow, glowing like a buried heart. Bran's eyes turned white as he reached into the weirwood's memory, seeking a way to weaken the god's hold. He saw flashes, Rhaegal kneeling before the stone, cutting his palm, the green light drinking his blood. He heard the god's voice promising him glory beyond death. But Bran also saw something else, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of sorrow as Rhaegal sealed the pact. The man he had been once still lingered within the monster he had become. Mira turned sharply. "Riders!" she hissed. Through the swirling snow came the glint of green armor. Rhaegal had arrived. He dismounted slowly, his eyes gleaming with fury and a strange, cold sorrow. "You should not have come here, Stark," he said, his voice carrying easily across the wind. Mira raised her spear. You don't have to do this. I do, he answered. Without the god, I am nothing. Do you know what it is to die and rise again? To feel your soul unbound and the pain of mortality stripped away? You would not give it up either. Bran's voice was quiet, yet it seemed to fill the air. You were human once. You can be again. Rhaegal's jaw tightened. And be weak? Be forgotten? Better forgotten than damned. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The snow fell between them like drifting ash. Then Rhaegal drew his sword. The green light pulsed brighter beneath the stone. Then let the strong decide. He advanced, every step shaking the ground. Mira met him head-on, her spear flashing. The clash rang like thunder through the valley. She fought fiercely, but his blows were monstrous. Sparks flew, snow melted beneath their feet. Then Bran cried out, his eyes blazing white. The runes along the shrine flared, and the ground split open. Green fire spilled upward, enveloping them all in an otherworldly glow. Rhaegal staggered, his blade trembling. The god's voice screamed in his mind, kill them, bind the blood anew. But another voice rose within him, his own, faint but desperate. No more. He fell to one knee, the sword slipping from his grasp. The glow within his eyes dimmed. For the first time in years, blood, red and human, ran down his cheek. Mira stepped back, breathing hard. Bran's voice came softly through the storm. It's breaking. The curse is breaking. Yet as the last light faded, the god's rage tore through the valley like a storm. The air howled, the stone cracked apart, and a wave of green fire surged toward them. And from far off, through the blizzard's veil, the direwolf banners came riding hard. Jon Snow was almost upon them. The end, for mortal or immortal alike, was drawing near. The storm did not cease. It screamed across the frozen lands like a living thing, flaying the skin from the world and swallowing sound and sight alike. Jon Snow pressed onward through that tempest, his cloak heavy with ice, his horse's breath steaming white in the dark. Behind him rode the men of the north, their faces pale beneath their helms, their hearts hardened by fear and duty. They followed the trail of the Green Knight, a faint line of scorched snow where Rhaegal Valor's power had seared the ground. Each mile brought them closer to the shrine of Vanar, where Bran and Mira now stood upon the edge of gods and doom. When the wind broke for a heartbeat, Jon raised a hand. His column halted. In the valley below, the storm churned around a pillar of green fire that rose from the earth like the breath of some buried beast. The air itself seemed to hum. He's there, Jon said grimly. And so is my brother. Davos crossed himself in the old way. 7 save us. I've seen dragons, dead men, and wild gods, but I've never felt the world itself afraid. Jon looked to the north, where thunder rolled over the mountains. The world should be afraid, he said, because what's waiting down there isn't a man. They descended into the valley. The ground was slick with melting snow, and the air shimmered with heat, though no flame was visible. The closer they rode, the more the men shivered, not from cold, but from something deeper, a dread that seemed to whisper their names. When they reached the mouth of the ravine, Jon dismounted. No one follows me beyond this point, he said. If I fail, burn the shrine to ash. Davos shook his head. And if it doesn't burn? Jon's hand rested on Longclaw's hilt. Then we die trying. He went forward alone. At the heart of the shrine, Mira Reed knelt beside Bran, who lay motionless on the frozen stone. The air pulsed with green light, casting long, shuddering shadows. Across from them stood Sir Rhaegal, bareheaded now, his face pale as marble, veins of silver glowing faintly beneath his skin. He was breathing hard, though no wound yet marked him. The god's voice still echoed in his mind, a roar of rage and pain. The bond is breaking. Stop him. Spill their blood and renew the oath. Rhaegal pressed his hands to his temples. Enough, he snarled. I gave you my life, my blood. What more do you demand? The god's laughter was like the cracking of ice. You swore to be mine, mortal. There is no life beyond my will. For a moment, the proud knight faltered. Memories flashed unbidden. His father's face, his first sword, the day he knelt at the foot of the black stone and begged never to die. He had been broken then, defeated in battle, and left for dead. The god had whispered to him of power and vengeance, of immortality and rule. He had said yes. Now he saw what that yes had cost. Rhaegal. Bran's voice came softly from where he lay. His eyes were white, seeing not the shrine but something far beyond it. You can end it. The power isn't yours, it's his. But he cannot keep it if you let go. Rhaegal looked down at his hands, trembling. And be nothing again? I have conquered half the north. I have made kings tremble. You are still a man, Bran said, and men must die. The words struck like a blade. For an instant, Rhaegal's face twisted with rage. Then, slowly, his expression changed. Snow began to fall again, fine and silent. Jon appeared at the mouth of the ravine, Longclaw gleaming faintly in the dim light. Mira saw him and cried out in relief, though the sound was drowned by the rising howl of the wind. Rhaegal turned, his eyes burning with green fire once more. You came to finish it, he said. I came to free my brother, Jon answered, stepping forward. And you, if there's any part of you left that wants it. Rhaegal's laugh was hollow. You speak of freedom as if you know its cost. He lifted Vermithor's fang. Come then, Lord of Winterfell. Let us see which of us the gods favor. Their blades met in a storm of sparks. Longclaw rang against Valyrian steel, echoing like thunder through the cavern. Rhaegal's strength was monstrous. Each strike drove Jon back, his boots skidding on the ice. Yet Jon fought with grim resolve, every motion honed by years of battle and loss. Mira dragged Bran's sled toward the wall of runes. He has to bleed here, Bran gasped. His blood must touch the stone. But he's too strong, she whispered. Jon's arm ached, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Rhaegal's sword bit into his shoulder, drawing blood. The heat from the shrine scorched his skin, yet he did not yield. He feinted left, swung right, and caught Rhaegal's wrist. Longclaw cut a shallow line across the immortal knight's cheek. For the first time, blood spilled, red, human, and steaming in the cold air. Rhaegal froze. His hand went to his face, his eyes widening. No, he breathed. It cannot be. The god's voice shrieked within him. Fool, you betray me. Pain tore through his body. The veins of silver flared white-hot. He screamed, the sound shaking the walls. The runes on the stone blazed with light, and a crack split the altar from end to end. Jon staggered back, shielding his eyes. The green fire that had filled the shrine began to twist and recoil, its shape turning monstrous, a vast serpent of light writhing in fury. I will not be unmade, the god thundered. Bran raised his hand. You were forgotten once. You will be forgotten again. The serpent struck, but before it could reach them, Rhaegal moved. He seized his sword and drove it into his own chest, the blade piercing through to the stone beneath. For an instant, all was still. Then light burst outward in a wave that blinded them all. When Jon's vision cleared, Rhaegal lay slumped against the altar, his armor blackened, his face peaceful. The green glow was gone. Only a faint warmth lingered in the air, like the last breath of summer. Bran opened his eyes, the white fading from them. "It's done," he whispered. "The god is gone." Mira knelt beside Rhaegal's body. "He saved us," she said softly. Jon sheathed Longclaw. He saved himself. Outside, the storm was dying. The snow fell gently now, covering the battlefield in a white shroud. Rhaegal's men, miles away, felt the bond of their lord's power break. Some fled. Others dropped their weapons and knelt, weeping. As dawn broke over the valley, Jon and his companions began the long journey back to Winterfell. At the crest of a hill, Jon turned once to look behind him. The shrine was silent now, buried in the drifting snow. No light shone from it. No voice whispered from beneath. Yet for a moment, he thought he saw a single green spark rise into the sky, fading like a dying star. He said nothing of it. Winterfell's gates opened to them at dusk. The people cheered faintly when they saw Bran alive, though sorrow clouded their joy. The war was ended, but its cost would not soon fade. That night, Jon stood before the weirwood tree in the Godswood. The snow fell softly through the branches. "Peace, at last," Sansa said beside him. "For now," Jon murmured. He looked northward to where the horizon vanished in white. But the north remembers. It always does. The wind carried no answer, only the hush of falling snow and the faintest echo of a serpent's hiss lost in the storm. And so ended the path of the proud immortal villain, born in fire, undone by pride, remembered only in whispers. Yet the gods of the north do not sleep forever, and deep beneath the ice, something ancient shifted once more. The snows did not melt for many moons after the fall of the immortal night. The north lay silent beneath its white burden, the scars of war buried but not forgotten. Winterfell stood proud once more, its towers wreathed in smoke and the smell of wood fire. Yet within its walls there was little rest, for though the god was banished and Sir Rhaegal Vaelor's body lay in a tomb of stone and ice, whispers lingered, whispers of power unspent, of dreams too vivid to be mere dreams. Jon Snow slept little in those days. When he did, his sleep was haunted. He would see the serpent banner rippling over frozen fields and hear a voice, soft, patient, almost human, calling his name from beneath the snow. At dawn, he would rise, shake off the visions, and ride the ramparts while the castle still slept. The air bit deep, and his thoughts were heavier than the cold. "The war is over," he told himself each morning. "The north is safe." Yet part of him could not believe it. Bran Stark, though weak from his journey, seemed more distant than ever. He spent long hours beneath the heart tree, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the mortal world. Sansa ruled the castle wisely and justly, her calm a balm to those who had lost much. And yet, beneath the peace, the north was uneasy. The first sign came a fortnight after their return. A hunter from the Wolfswood stumbled into the gates, half frozen, raving of strange lights in the forest, green fire that danced among the trees, and shapes that whispered his name. Most thought him mad, but when his wounds were examined, they found upon his chest a faint mark shaped like a serpent's eye. Jon and Bran went to see him that night. The man lay shivering on a cot, his skin pale as milk. When he saw Bran, he began to weep. "He's not gone," he whispered. "I saw him walking through the fire, the night. He called me to kneel." Bran's expression did not change. "The god's touch lingers," he said softly. "Its essence was scattered, not destroyed." Jon frowned. "You said it was gone." "I said the bond was broken," Bran replied. But the god's power, its echo, remains. Rhaegal's blood awakened something beneath the ice, something that cannot yet sleep. That night, as the castle slept, Bran entered the weirwood's sight again. His ravens flew high above the white forest, their black wings cutting through the falling snow. Through them, he saw movement. Men kneeling in a clearing, carving strange symbols into the frost. Around them burned green torches, and in their midst stood a figure cloaked in black, holding aloft a blade that shimmered faintly with a serpent's sheen. Bran woke with a start. "He has followers," he murmured, "a cult born from his shadow." Sansa's face hardened when she heard it. "Then we must find them before they find us." Jon nodded. "I'll ride at dawn." He took a small company, Davos, a dozen trusted men, and the direwolf Ghost, whose eyes burned like embers in the dark. They rode west into the Wolfswood, following the hunter's path. The snow lay deep, muffling the sound of their passage. The forest was silent, too silent, as if holding its breath. By the second day, they found the clearing. The trees there were scorched black, and the ground beneath them glittered faintly with frost that burned green in the torchlight. At the center stood an altar of ice, carved with the same runes that had marked the shrine of Vaynor. Upon it lay the corpse of a man, one of Rhaegal's former captains, his chest torn open, his heart missing. Davos crossed himself. "Gods have mercy," he whispered. "They mean to bring him back." Jon knelt, brushing the snow from the altar. The ice was warm beneath his glove. "No," he said quietly. "Not him. Something worse." That night, as they camped at the edge of the clearing, Jon dreamed again. He stood upon a frozen lake beneath a sky of green fire. A voice whispered from the depths below the ice. "The proud fall, but their pride endures. You slew the vessel, but not the flame." When he woke, Ghost was growling softly, the hairs along his spine standing rigid. The forest around them was alive with faint movement, footsteps, whispers, the creak of unseen things. "Up," Jon said. "We're not alone." Figures emerged from the trees, men and women draped in furs and tattered armor, their eyes glowing faintly green. They bore no weapons, but moved with the grace of predators. "Do not fight," one of them said. His voice was calm, eerily so. "The Immortal waits. The flame will rise again." Jon stepped forward, Longclaw drawn. "The Immortal is dead." The man smiled faintly. "Death is but another door, opened by those strong enough to turn its key." Then they struck. The fight was brutal and fast. Steel flashed, men cried out, blood steamed on the snow. Jon fought with grim efficiency, his blade cleaving through the possessed like shadows. Yet even as they fell, their blood hissed upon the ground, glowing green before vanishing into the frost. By dawn, the survivors fled into the trees. Of Jon's men, half were dead or wounded. Davos bound his arm with a torn cloak. "They weren't men," he said. "Not truly. Their eyes, there was nothing human left." Jon stared at the ground where the blood had burned. The ice there pulsed faintly, as though something beneath it stirred. "We end this before it begins," he said. "Every shrine, every trace of that power, we destroy it all." They returned to Winterfell bearing grim tidings. Sansa listened in silence, her face pale. Bran merely nodded, as if he had foreseen it. "The god feeds on worship," he said. "So long as men remember the name of the Immortal, it will find a way to return. Pride is its vessel, and pride is endless." Jon clenched his fists. "Then we must become its forgetfulness." In the days that followed, riders were sent to every holdfast, every keep that had once flown Rhaegal's banner. The serpent sigil was outlawed. Those who spoke of him in reverence were cast from their homes or worse. The people obeyed, for they had seen enough of miracles to fear them. Yet as winter deepened, strange tales spread once more. In the far villages, travelers spoke of a pale figure seen walking the frozen lakes at night, his eyes like stars, his voice whispering of strength and fire. None could prove it. But the stories grew, as stories always do. One night, John stood again before the heart tree. The wind was cold and clear, the stars bright above the castle. "He's gone," he said softly, though the words felt hollow. Bran's voice came behind him. "Perhaps, but legends do not die as men do. They sleep, they wait." John turned to him. "Then what do we do?" Bran's gaze drifted toward the north, where the sky shimmered faintly with green light. "We endure," he said simply. "As the north always has. And somewhere beyond the wall, where the cold is endless and time stands still, a spark of green fire flickered once and was gone. But the ice remembered. It always does. Winterfell had known many winters, yet none so heavy with silence as that which followed the fall of the immortal night. Snow buried the walls to the height of a man, and the godswood stood frozen in quiet prayer beneath its blanket of white. Smoke rose from the castle chimneys, and the smell of wood fire mixed with the iron tang of cold air. Jon Snow walked those ramparts daily, his cloak stiff with frost. Though the war was won, he could not find peace. There was something in the air, an unease, as though the north itself waited for a sound that never came. The ravens were restless. The dogs howled at the unseen. He spoke little of it, yet the dreams persisted. Every night he saw Rhaegal Valor standing upon a field of green flame, his face both proud and sorrowful. "You cannot kill pride," the night would whisper, "for it lives in every heart that dares to rise above its place." Then Jon would wake, his hand upon Longclaw, sweat freezing on his skin. Bran knew, of course. He knew everything. One evening, Jon found his brother by the heart tree, the red leaves stirring in the wind like whispers. Bran's eyes were clouded white, his mind wandering far. "You're watching again," Jon said quietly. Bran nodded. The god's shadow moves still, though faintly. Its memory clings to the places where Rhaegal's blood was spilled. There are fires burning in the west, secret gatherings, men and women speaking his name. "Worshippers," Jon said grimly. "We've hunted them before." "Not like these," Bran murmured. "These do not serve out of faith, but out of fear. They say the night will return with the thaw." Jon frowned. "The thaw is months away." Bran's gaze turned toward the horizon, where the sun bled weakly through the clouds. "The thaw always comes." In the days that followed, the air began to change. The snows softened, and water ran in slow rivulets down the walls. The croak of crows filled the mornings. Winter was loosening its grip, but the north did not rejoice. The small folk whispered that the seasons themselves had turned too soon, that the land was uneasy. At Deep Down, where Rhaegal had first proclaimed his rule, a band of sellswords uncovered something buried beneath the old keep. It was a shard of black metal, curved like a fang and faintly warm to the touch. When they brought it to their captain, he declared it cursed and cast it into the fire. But the fire burned green, and by morning the shard was gone. The tale reached Winterfell within a week. Bran's ravens carried word from every corner of the realm. Dreams of serpent eyes, crops growing in snow, flames that whispered names. Sansa summoned Jon and the council. "It may be nothing," she said, "but too many speak of these things to ignore them." Jon studied the map spread before them, tracing the reports with a gloved finger. They form a line. from Deep Down to Torrens Square to Barrowton. The same path Rhaegal marched. The same path his blood was spilled, Bran said softly. Davos crossed his arms. If the god's power seeps through those places, then it's like poison in the veins of the land. You can't kill a sickness with a sword. No, Jon agreed, but you can burn it out. And so the order was given. From Winterfell rode 3 companies of men bearing torches and oil. Their task was simple: cleanse every trace of Rhaegal's war, destroy any altar, any relic, any place where his name was still spoken. Jon rode with the first company, his direwolf ghost padding beside him. The journey was harsh and silent. Villages lay half abandoned, the people wary, their eyes haunted. When Jon asked after strange lights or dreams, they crossed themselves and said little. At Deep Down, the castle was nothing but ruins beneath the snow. Yet when the men began to set fire to the remaining halls, a wind rose, sudden, sharp, and bitter cold. The flames turned green, and a voice echoed faintly through the smoke. You cannot burn what does not die. Some men fled, others prayed aloud. Jon stood unmoving, watching the fire consume the ruins. The voice faded, but the smell of it lingered, a sweetness like decay. When he returned to Winterfell, the skies had grown darker. The northern lights shimmered every night, no longer white and blue, but tinged with faint green. Sansa met him in the great hall. You've seen it too, she said quietly. Jon nodded. It's spreading. Whatever power was buried is waking again. And if it cannot be destroyed, then it must be sealed, said Bran, entering behind them. The same way the first men bound the gods that came before. There are songs of such things in the oldest tongues, of stone circles and blood oaths, of names unspoken that hold the world in place. Sansa folded her arms. And you know how to do this? Bran's gaze was distant. No, but I can find one who does. That night he went into the God's Wood again, his body still and cold while his mind flew with the ravens. He traveled far, over the shivering sea, across the ruins of Hardhome, until he reached a land of black cliffs and endless ice. There, in a cave whose walls shimmered with old light, something stirred. It was not the children of the forest, though they had once dwelt there. It was older still, a creature of root and bone, its body entwined with the stone. Its eyes opened as Bran entered its mind, and its voice was like the creak of ancient trees. You seek to bind that which is beyond binding, it said. I seek to save my people, Bran answered. The god that once dwelt beneath the north stirs again. It will rise if we do nothing. The creature's laughter was slow and weary. Mortals ever make and unmake their masters. Very well. The god was sealed once before, in the age before men. To bind it again, you must find the Stone of Echoes, the heart of the old world. It lies where fire meets frost, beneath the ruins of Valis Tor. Valis Tor, Bran whispered, the fortress beneath the frozen bay. Bring blood and bring will, said the voice. Only those who walk between life and death may wield the binding. When Bran awoke, his lips were blue, and frost clung to his lashes. I have seen what must be done, he told Jon, but it will not be done without cost. By morning, word spread that Jon Snow would ride again. The north stirred, weary yet obedient. Sansa watched him prepare in silence. You've given enough, she said quietly. Jon fastened his sword belt. The north gave more. Bran waited at the gate, swathed in furs, his expression unreadable. If the god rises again, the world will drown in fire and shadow, he said. We must end it before the thaw turns to flood. Jon mounted his horse and looked once toward the walls of Winterfell. Then we ride to Valis Tor. The gates opened. The snow swirled in the wind. The men of the north followed their lord into the white, their banners snapping against the storm. Behind them, the lights in the northern sky pulsed once, green, bright, and watchful. And somewhere deep beneath the ice, a heartbeat echoed softly, slow and patient. The immortal night had died, but the god that made him had only begun to wake. The journey to Valis Tor was a march into legend. None in the living north remembered the way to that forsaken fortress, for it had been swallowed by ice long before the wall was raised. The old song spoke of it as a citadel of the first men, built where the frozen bay met the boiling vents of the earth, a place where fire and frost had once warred beneath the stars. Jon Snow led 200 riders northward through the endless white, his direwolf ghosting silent at his side. Bran traveled in a sleigh drawn by shaggy northern horses. His sight turned inward, guiding them through visions rather than maps. The nights were long and strange. The aurora burned green above the world, and the snow sometimes fell upward, as if drawn to the sky by invisible hands. They rode for 12 days without sight of man or beast. The wind howled like a thing alive, and the horizon was forever shifting, a desert of glass and frost. Yet Bran's voice, calm and cold, led them onward. "The bay is near," he would murmur from his furs. "Beneath it lies the gate of fire." On the 13th night, they came upon it. Valis Tor rose from the ice like the bones of some dead giant. Black towers jutted at mad angles from the glacier, cracked and half-buried, their stones fused with glass. Steam rose from fissures in the ground, staining the air with a bitter metallic scent. Beneath the largest tower, a rent in the earth breathed faint heat, a tunnel descending into blackness. Davos spat. "7 take me, if I've ever seen a place more cursed." Jon dismounted. "It's what we came for." He could feel the warmth on his face, a wrong kind of warmth, as if the land itself remembered fire. The horses balked, eyes rolling white, but the men followed their lord, torches in hand. The descent was steep. The walls were slick with ice and shot through with veins of glowing stone that pulsed faintly, as if blood still moved within them. The deeper they went, the louder the sound became, a steady throbbing, like the heartbeat of a buried world. Bran spoke softly as they walked. "The stone of echoes lies at the center. It was made before words, before gods, before men. When the old god was cast down, its spirit sank into this place. The stone binds it still." "And if we touch it?" Davos asked. Bran's eyes gleamed in the torchlight. "Then it will touch us back." At last, they came into a vast chamber beneath the earth. It was shaped like a dome, its ceiling lost in shadow. In its center stood a great pillar of translucent crystal, tall as the weirwoods of the south. Inside the crystal flickered a faint green light, pulsing in time with the beating sound that filled the air. Jon felt his breath catch. The light was beautiful and terrible all at once, like looking into the heart of the world. Bran's voice echoed through the chamber. "This is the Stone of Echoes. It remembers every oath ever spoken upon this land. To bind the god again, blood must seal the vow." Jon frowned. "Whose blood?" Bran looked at him, and the answer was plain in his eyes. "The blood of kings, and of those who walked with death." Jon's hand went to the scar above his heart. "Then it's mine." He stepped forward, but the air thickened, trembling with unseen power. The green light within the crystal brightened, and a voice rose from its depths. Low, resonant, familiar. "You return to finish what you began." Jon froze. The voice was Rhaegal's. It filled the chamber like the tide, gentle at first, then rising until it shook the stone. You slew me once, but pride never dies. I have seen the halls of the old god, and I have returned to claim what was promised. The crystal flared, and shadows moved within its light, faces, arms, the suggestion of something vast and serpentine struggling to be born. Bran raised his hand. It's not him alone. The god uses his soul as a vessel. And gladly do I serve, the voice thundered. I am reborn through remembrance. Every man who feared me, every tale told in the dark, they feed me. The men drew their swords, but the air itself turned against them. Wind roared through the chamber, carrying with it whispers of fire. One by one, the torches guttered out until only the green glow remained. "Jon!" Davos shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. Jon advanced toward the stone, Longclaw drawn. His reflection moved within the crystal, not as he was, but as he might have been, tall, crowned, his eyes burning green. "You can't have him," Jon growled. "He is already mine." The crystal cracked with a sound like thunder. A beam of green light lanced out, striking the floor. From it rose a shape, armored, terrible, and familiar. Sir Rhaegal Valor, reborn in ghostly flame, his sword a streak of living fire. Jon raised Longclaw. "Then I'll kill you again." The clash was like a storm unleashed. Steel met flame, echoing through the cavern. Rhaegal moved like a phantom, every strike faster than sight. Jon parried, stumbled, struck back. Sparks flew, the ground split, and molten light spilled between the cracks. "Jon!" Bran's voice rose above the din. "Strike the stone. Only the heart can break the bond." Jon feinted left, rolled beneath Rhaegal's swing, and drove Longclaw deep into the crystal. The effect was instant. The chamber blazed with blinding light. Rhaegal screamed, a sound that tore through the world, and his form began to unravel, scattering into ash and fire. The crystal shattered into 1,000 shards, each pulsing once before dimming. The silence that followed was immense. The heartbeat had stopped. The green light was gone. Jon fell to one knee, chest heaving. Ghost whined softly, nuzzling his hand. Around him, the men stood dazed, blinking in the sudden dark. Bran's eyes were closed, his face pale. "It is done," he whispered. "The god is bound once more. Its voice will fade with the thaw." Jon looked up at the broken crystal. "And Rhaegal?" "Gone," Bran said. "At last." Yet as they made their way from that cursed place, Jon could not shake the feeling of being watched. The air was still too warm, the silence too deep. When they emerged onto the ice, night had fallen. Above them, the sky burned with shifting colors, red, gold, and faintly, faintly green. Bran turned his gaze northward. "The land will sleep again," he said. "But remember this, gods do not die, they wait." Jon said nothing. He looked once more toward the black towers of Valis Tor, half buried in snow and shadow, and thought he heard, just for an instant, the faintest echo of a serpent's hiss carried on the wind. Then the sound was gone, and the night was still. They rode south toward Winterfell, their torches flickering against the vast dark, unaware that beneath the ice, deep within the earth, one shard of crystal yet glowed faintly, its pulse slow, steady, alive. The men of the north returned as shadows of themselves. The journey from Valis Tor had stolen from them warmth, sleep, and something deeper, a sense of belonging to the living world. Their eyes carried the reflection of that buried fire, and in their silence lay the memory of what they had witnessed beneath the ice. Winterfell received them with mourning rather than cheer. The snows had begun to melt. Yet the air was wrong, too still, too heavy. The streams ran sluggish, as though the land itself hesitated to wake. Jon Snow rode through the gates first, his black cloak tattered by frost, Longclaw bound in cloth. Behind him came Davos, limping, and a score of riders with faces pale as ghosts. Sansa met them in the yard. She saw her brother dismount, and knew before he spoke that the tale would not bring peace. "It's done," Jon said, his voice low. "The god is bound again. The light is gone." Her eyes searched his face. "But you don't believe it's over?" Jon looked past her, toward the Heart Tower. "It's never over." That night, the hall was filled with the sound of fire and quiet talk. The surviving riders drank in silence, avoiding one another's gaze. Bran sat near the hearth, wrapped in furs, his eyes half closed. When he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "The bond has been sealed," he murmured. "But the world remembers the touch of power. The stones, the trees, even the wind. They whisper of what was." Davos shifted uneasily. "Then we've traded one curse for another." Bran did not answer. Later, when the others had gone, Jon stood before the great hearth alone. The flames cast strange shadows along the walls, bending as though something unseen moved behind them. He poured a cup of ale, but did not drink. The memory of that green light haunted him still, the hum of the crystal, the voice that had spoken through Rhaegal's face. He had killed him twice now, yet Rhaegal's words lingered. "You cannot kill pride. It lives in every heart that dares to rise above its place." Jon knew it to be true. Pride had built the kingdoms of men. Pride had destroyed them. He left the hall before dawn, when the world was gray and cold. The godswood waited, silent save for the faint drip of melting snow. Beneath the heart tree, Bran sat motionless, his eyes white as frost. "I saw him again," Bran said before Jon could speak. "Not in flesh, but in the memory of the land. His image burns there still." Jon frowned. "A ghost?" "A mark," Bran said. "A scar upon the world. The old god is gone, but the vessel's shadow endures. It will fade in time, but not yet." Jon crouched beside him. "You should rest." Bran's gaze drifted toward the pool of black water at the base of the tree. "Rest? There is no rest for those who see too much. I hear the whispers in the roots. The ice beneath us remembers. It does not forgive." The air grew colder. For a moment, Jon thought he saw a flicker of green deep within the water. Then it was gone. Spring crept upon the north reluctantly. The snow gave way to gray earth, and the first shoots of grass broke through the thaw. The small folk celebrated what they called the long end. A winter survived and a war ended. But in the high places, in ruined castles and forgotten barrows, strange things stirred. At Torrhen Square, a patrol found the walls marked with serpent sigils burned into the stone. At Barrowton, farmers unearthed coins bearing Rhaegal's likeness, their edges glowing faintly green in moonlight. Some spoke of hearing his voice in the wind, whispering of strength and freedom. When word reached Winterfell, Sansa convened her council. "We cannot chase shadows forever," she said. "If fear rules the north, then the god wins even in death." Jon nodded. "Fear spreads faster than truth. But if these signs remain, they will feed it." Davos rubbed his beard. "You've already burned his keeps, buried his shrines, slain his followers. What more can be done?" Bran looked up from the weirwood carving he held. "Forget him." The hall fell silent. "Erase his name," Bran said. "Strike it from songs and stories. Let his deeds fade into dust. A god without memory is a god unmade." Sansa considered this. And if men remember anyway? Then let them remember a lie, Bran replied. Let them remember a villain, not a legend. The proud knight who defied death and was damned by it. Tell it so often that no other truth survives. Jon's mouth tightened. We would be liars. We would be keepers of peace, Sansa said quietly, and that is the greater duty. Thus began the rewriting of Rhaegal Valor's tale. The maesters penned chronicles naming him a madman and usurper. Minstrels sang of his cruelty, not his courage. His banners were burned, his sword lost to rumor, his name spoken only in warning to prideful children. The people of the North, weary of fear, accepted the tale gladly. It was easier to hate a monster than to mourn a man. Yet Jon could not bring himself to speak the lie. He had seen the truth too clearly, the pride that had driven Rhaegal to reach beyond mortal limits, the fire that had once burned noble within him before it was twisted by the god's promise. And sometimes, in the stillness of night, Jon wondered if he himself was any different. He had risen from death once. He had defied nature and fate. Was that not its own kind of pride? The thought festered in him, quiet and cold. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, he found himself drawn again to the crypts below Winterfell. The air there was still and thick with dust. The statues of the Starks stood in solemn rows, their stone direwolves at their feet. Jon moved among them until he reached the far end, where a new tomb had been sealed, Rhaegal's. No sigil marked it, no name, only a single carved line, the knight who would not die. Jon knelt before it. "You're forgotten," he said softly, "as you wished." A drop of water fell from the ceiling, striking the stone. Jon did not notice that it glowed faintly green before fading. He rose to leave, but a whisper followed him, faint, almost imagined. To be forgotten is to be freed, but freedom is a seed that always grows again. He froze, listening. Only the drip of water answered. When he returned to the surface, the moon was rising. Bran sat by the gate, his eyes distant. "You heard it too," he said. Jon nodded slowly. "Then it's not over." Bran's voice was calm, almost resigned. "Nothing ever is. The gods fade, the songs change. But pride endures. It will find another name, another face." Jon looked northward, where the aurora shimmered faintly in the night. "Then we'll meet it when it comes." Bran smiled, a strange, knowing smile that held both sorrow and peace. Aye, the North always remembers. And somewhere far beyond Winterfell's walls, where the last of the snow met the dark sea, a single shard of green crystal washed ashore, pulsing once before being swallowed by the tide. Its light was faint, but it did not go out. Spring lingered only briefly in the north. The snow retreated from the hills, and rivers swelled with the rush of meltwater, but the air never lost its edge. The people of Winterfell moved about their duties with the weary patience of those who had survived too much. Yet even as the land softened, shadows clung to its edges. The proud knight's tale had been buried, his name scrubbed from song and script, but whispers, like weeds, grew from the cracks. Jon Snow heard them first from the men who patrolled the outlying villages. A shepherd near the Barrowlands spoke of a voice that sang beneath the earth. A trapper swore his snares had been melted by a green fire that vanished before his eyes. In each tale, Jon heard a familiar echo, a pulse beneath the words that chilled his blood. Bran said little, though his eyes grew darker with every passing moon. He would spend hours in the Godswood, unmoving, as if listening to something too faint for mortal ears. Sansa began to rule alone more often, her command unflinching, but her gaze wary when it rested upon her brothers. One night, as the hall grew quiet and the moon cast its pale light over the snow, Bran spoke. "The shard has awakened." Jon turned. "What shard?" "The one that broke from the Stone of Echoes," Bran replied. "When we shattered the crystal beneath Valis Tor, one piece survived. It remembers the god's song. It calls to those who still dream of power." "Where is it?" Bran's eyes unfocused, white rolling over them like mist. "Far to the west, beyond the Frostfangs. It stirs beneath the sea cliffs, where the wildlings say the air burns green at night." Jon's jaw tightened. "Then I'll go." Sansa's voice was steady. "You will not go alone." The company that left Winterfell was small. Jon, Davos, 10 men sworn by oath, and 2 of the free folk who knew the western wilds. Ghost padded ahead of them, silent as death, his white fur catching moonlight. The journey carried them past the haunted forests and across the frozen rivers where the ice groaned like a sleeping beast. At the edge of the Frostfangs, the mountains rose like black teeth against the sky. The air there was bitter and sharp, and no birds sang. Strange carvings marked the stones, spirals, serpents, eyes carved into the rock by hands older than men. On the 7th day, as dusk fell, they saw it, a faint green shimmer upon the cliffs far below, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the snow. "That's it," said Tormund's kin, "a wildling woman called Isla. The old gods sleep there. Best not to wake them." Jon looked down the icy slope, his breath clouding in the air. "We woke worse before," he said. "We'll end it now." They descended by torchlight, the path treacherous and narrow. The air grew warmer the lower they went, thick with the scent of salt and sulfur. The sea below churned against jagged rocks, and steam rose where molten veins met frozen water. At the base of the cliff yawned a cavern, its mouth rimmed with frost that glowed faintly green. The torches flickered and died as they entered, snuffed by unseen breath. Davos cursed softly. "We've walked into the belly of the beast." Inside, the walls shimmered with veins of crystal. The glow came from within them, soft, rhythmic, alive. At the far end of the cavern, half buried in rock, lay the shard, a sliver of translucent stone no longer than a sword, pulsing faintly with emerald light. Jon stepped closer. The air trembled. He could hear it, a faint voice, whispering just beyond sense. It was not words, not at first, but emotion, pride, hunger, the memory of command. "Jon," Davos said warningly, but Jon did not stop. His fingers brushed the surface of the shard. It was warm, alive. For an instant, he saw a flash of faces within it. Rhaegal Valor, his serpent helm gleaming, the god beneath the ice, Bran's pale eyes watching all. Then the cavern shuddered. The light flared, searing green. The crystal veins along the walls pulsed in answer, and from the darkness came a sound like 1,000 whispers breathing in unison. The men fell back, shouting. Ghost snarled, his fur bristling. Jon staggered away from the shard, clutching his hand. It burned where he had touched it, the skin marked with a faint serpentine scar. The shard's light dimmed, but did not die. From its depths came a voice, cold and calm as the deep sea. "You bound me once, breaker of oaths, yet every chain you forge is made from your own pride." Jon's pulse thundered in his ears. "Show yourself," he hissed. The voice laughed softly. "You carry me already." And he understood then what Bran had feared. The god had not been destroyed, nor even sealed. It had merely taken new shape, no longer bound to Rhaegal's flesh, but to the memory of the man who had slain him. He fell to his knees, his vision swimming with green light. In it, he saw the fields of fire again, the battles, the faces of those he had lost. All of it burned with the same pride that had damned Rhaegal, the will to rise, to defy death, to hold the world against the night. "You are mine now," the voice whispered. "Pride made you once, pride shall unmake you." "Jon!" Davos seized his shoulder, shaking him back to sense. The glow faded, the cavern stilling. Jon gasped for air, his scarred hand trembling. "We're leaving," Davos said. "Whatever that thing is, it's not for men to face again." Jon nodded, but he knew it was already too late. The god's voice lingered in his blood like poison. They sealed the cavern with fire and stone, collapsing the cliffs above until the sea poured in to drown it. For 3 days, the air above the coast burned with green light before going dark once more. When they returned to Winterfell, Bran met them beneath the weirwood. His eyes flickered with faint alarm. "You touched it," he said. Jon unwrapped his hand. The scar glowed faintly even in the daylight. "It's in me now." Sansa's voice was soft but steady. "Can it be removed?" Bran shook his head. "Not removed, only mastered. The god feeds on pride, but pride is not evil in itself. It is strength until it becomes hunger." Jon looked at his hand. "Then I'll starve it." "Can you?" Bran asked quietly. Jon said nothing. That night he stood upon the walls alone, the wind cold against his face. Far below, the north slept, its fields silver under the moon. In the distance, faint upon the horizon, a streak of green light rose and fell like a dying star. He remembered Rhaegal's words, "You cannot kill pride. It lives in every heart that dares to rise above its place." Jon turned from the light. "Then I'll carry it," he murmured. "Better me than another." Ghost pressed close beside him, and together they watched the dawn creep over the frozen lands. The green faded from the sky, leaving only gray. For now, the gods slept, but somewhere deep beneath the ice and sea, where the drowned shard pulsed faintly against the dark, a whisper stirred once more, soft, patient, eternal, and the north listened. Summer came late to the north. The snows had melted from the fields, yet the wind still carried the bite of winter. Crops grew thin and slow, and the small folk muttered that the gods had soured the soil. At night, strange lights were seen upon the horizon, veins of pale green winding through the clouds like cracks in glass. Jon Snow watched them from the battlements of Winterfell, his black cloak stirring in the wind. He no longer felt the cold as other men did. The mark upon his hand glowed faintly beneath its wrappings, sometimes warming, sometimes chilling him to the bone. He told no one how often he heard the voice now, a whisper beneath the rustle of leaves, an echo in the ring of steel, always reminding him that pride cannot die. Bran knew, of course. "The god sleeps within you," he had said, "not as a prisoner, but as a shadow. Shadows wait for light." Jon had only nodded. Words changed nothing. The North needed its lord, not a haunted man. He buried himself in duty, settling disputes, rebuilding villages, sending food to the outlying holds. Sansa ruled beside him, calm and cunning, her voice steady even when her eyes betrayed worry. But the land itself seemed restless. Wolves gathered in great numbers near the Wolf's Wood. The rivers ran darker, their currents heavy with silt from the mountains. Then came the rider from the coast. He was half dead when the guards found him. His face burned, his armor blackened. He carried no sigil, only a strip of cloth singed green at the edges. Before dying, he gasped a single word: Flamewake. In the hall, Bran traced the name upon the table's map. "A fishing hamlet, long abandoned," he said, "northwest of Torrhen Square. It lies near the sea cliffs where you found the shard." John stared at the mark. The sea drowned that place. Perhaps, Bran murmured. But something stirs there still. They rode at dawn. The journey was short but grim. The nearer they came to the sea, the more the earth changed. The grass grew thin, brittle beneath the hooves of their horses, and the air smelled of salt and ash. The cliffs of Flamewake rose black and jagged against the gray sky, streaked with strange veins of glass that caught the light like wet scales. John dismounted at the edge of the shore. The ruins of the hamlet stood half buried in sand, the remnants of wooden huts charred and warped. Smoke curled from fissures in the ground. Ghost prowled ahead, his fur bristling. Davos knelt beside a scorched post. This isn't from any torch I know. The ground's melted, like stone turned to water. John crouched and pressed a gloved hand to the earth. It was warm. The shard, he murmured. It's not dead. As if in answer, the wind shifted, carrying a low hum, a sound more felt than heard. The men stiffened. The waves beat harder against the rocks, each crash deeper, heavier. And then the earth cracked. A line of green light split the sand at John's feet, running toward the sea. The water began to boil. Out of the surf rose shapes, twisted things half-formed of smoke and flame. Their eyes gleamed with faint awareness, their voices a chorus of whispers. You bound the god, but the sea remembers. John drew Longclaw. Back, he shouted. Form ranks. The creatures advanced, their bodies flickering like candles in the wind. When the first struck, its touch burned cold, searing through mail and flesh alike. Men screamed. Ghost leapt among them, jaws snapping, tearing through mist and fire. John waded into the melee, his blade cutting through light and shadow. Each strike sent ripples through the air, but the creatures reformed again and again, fed by the green glow beneath the earth. Davos fought beside him, grim and silent, until one of the wraiths wrapped about his arm and pulled him into the surf. John turned, but a wall of flame separated them. The god's voice filled his head. All things return to the source. You are mine, child of pride. You carry my heart. The mark on John's hand burned white hot. Pain lanced through him, stealing his breath. The wraiths fell back, circling like wolves. He could feel the power within him stirring, the same fire that had once devoured Rhaegal. It begged to be loosed. Bran's warning echoed in memory. The shadow sleeps, but shadows wait for light. He clenched his fist. You want pride? He growled. Then you'll choke on mine. He thrust his marked hand toward the fissure. Green fire erupted, blinding in its fury. The wraiths screamed as they were drawn into the blaze, their forms unraveling. The sea hissed and boiled, the cliffs shaking. The glow spread outward, a storm of light meeting the waves. When it faded, only ash and steam remained. John fell to his knees, gasping. Ghost whined beside him, licking at his burned hand. The scar had deepened, its shape twisting now into something like a coiled serpent. Davos crawled from the shallows, coughing seawater, his face blackened with soot. You still breathing? John asked hoarsely. Barely, Davos rasped. But I'll take that over the alternative. They watched as the tide slowly reclaimed the ruins, hissing over the scorched sand. The hum had ceased. The light was gone. Back at Winterfell, the Meisters tended John's wound in silence. No poultice could cool it. No bandage would hide its glow. He dismissed them and stood before the window, watching the last snow melt from the roofs. Bran entered without sound. You used it, he said. John did not turn. I had no choice. There is always a choice. John faced him then, anger flickering behind his eyes. Would you have let them burn? Let the god rise again? Bran's gaze was calm, but sorrowful. Every time you draw upon its power, you strengthen the chain that binds you. The shadow feeds on your defiance. That is its design. Jon looked down at his hand. Then tell me how to end it. Bran hesitated. To end it, you must let it consume itself. The god is pride. It cannot bear submission. If you deny it utterly, it will devour itself in rage. But that path, he trailed off. That path may claim you as well. Jon turned back to the window. Then so be it. Weeks passed. The north began to heal. The rivers cleared. The earth grew fertile again, and for a time the strange lights vanished from the sky. But Sansa watched her brother with quiet fear. He spoke less, slept rarely, and when he did, his dreams were of fire and serpents. One night, she found him in the courtyard, standing barefoot in the snow. The mark on his hand glowed through the frost like an ember. "You can't fight it alone," she said. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds no joy. "I was never meant to live easy, Sansa. Not in this world." She touched his arm. "Then promise me you'll come back." Jon looked toward the north, always the north. "If I can." The wind rose, carrying with it the faintest sound, half whisper, half laughter from far beyond the wall. Ghost lifted his head, ears pricked. Somewhere out there, in the endless ice, the old god stirred once more, faint and patient. Its vessel walked the world still, not as a tyrant, but as a man who bore the weight of all pride upon his soul. And so, the North waited again, for winter, for reckoning, for the final silence that must one day come. The snows returned, as they always did. The summer had been brief, a fragile dream that melted beneath the weight of northern sky. The fields, newly sown, lay again beneath a shroud of white. The small folk grumbled but did not despair. Such was the way of things. Yet among the highborn, whispers grew sharper. The Lord of Winterfell had changed. Jon Snow no longer smiled, nor spoke at length. He wandered the battlements at dusk, his eyes fixed on horizons that no man could see. When he spoke to Sansa, his words were short. When he looked upon Bran, there was a shadow of fear in his gaze. The scar upon his hand never faded, and when the torches burned low, the mark shone faintly green, as though a hidden fire stirred beneath his skin. At night he dreamed of a voice, never clear, never distant, always near. It spoke not in command, but in invitation. "You are no different from me. You seek to rise above death, to master the fate that bends other men. Accept what you are." He would wake in cold sweat, his fingers clenched around Longclaw's hilt, the blade black and cold as the grave. Bran knew these things before Jon ever spoke of them. "You cannot master what was made to rule you," he said one evening, as they sat beneath the heart tree. The wind moved softly through the red leaves, and the carved face wept frozen tears. The god's voice is patient. It waits for pride to ripen. Jon shook his head. "Then I will not listen." Bran's eyes turned white, distant. "You already have." That night the wind changed. From the north came the scent of smoke, faint, yet distinct. The guards upon the wall saw strange lights flickering upon the horizon, green and gold, rising and falling like breathing fire. Jon ordered riders sent, though his heart already knew what they would find. The riders returned at dawn. Their horses were lathered, their faces gray with fear. "The wall burns," their captain said. "Not with flame, my lord, but with light. The ice glows from within. The old watchtowers have melted like wax." The hall erupted in clamor. Davos rose first. "By all gods, if the wall falls—" "It has not fallen," the captain said quickly. "But it groans, my lord, like a living thing in pain. Bran's eyes darkened. The god beneath the ice stirs once more. The seal weakens. The shard's call has reached beyond the world of men. Jon stood in silence for a long while, the firelight flickering across his face. Then, quietly, he said, "Ready the horses. We ride for Castle Black." Sansa moved to his side. "You cannot go alone." "I won't." He looked to her then, and for the first time in many moons, his expression softened. "You must hold Winterfell. If the North is to survive, someone must remain unbroken." She wanted to argue, but she saw the resolve in his eyes, the same iron calm that had carried him through war and death alike. She only nodded. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "That you will come back." Jon said nothing. He only clasped her hand, then turned to the door. The road to the wall was old and haunted. The snow fell thick and wet, muffling sound and thought alike. Jon's company was small: Davos, a handful of guards, and Ghost pacing ahead like a pale wraith. Bran traveled in silence, his mind wandering far beyond mortal sight. For 2 days they rode through the white wilderness. On the third, the air began to shimmer faintly green. The wind grew heavy, carrying a sound like distant thunder, a steady pulse that beat in rhythm with Jon's own heart. When at last they saw the wall, all words failed them. The great ice rampart, once pale blue as morning sky, now burned from within. Rivers of light ran through its depths, twisting and coiling like veins of molten glass. The black stone of Castle Black gleamed wetly in the glow. The ravens had fled. The watchtowers stood empty. Davos crossed himself. "7 save us." Jon dismounted slowly. His breath steamed in the cold air. "No gods will save us now." As they approached, the wall shuddered. From its base rose a column of mist, green and cold. The air hummed with a sound too deep for hearing. Bran's eyes rolled back, and his voice came thin and far away. "It calls to you," he said. "The god knows its vessel." Jon clenched his marked hand. "Then it will find its answer." He stepped forward, past the trembling line of men, toward the great gate, once black iron, now fused with glass. The hum deepened. His vision swam with light. "You came back to me," the voice said. "You bore my heart across the world, and now you return it. The wall is pride made flesh, men thinking they can hold the cold at bay. Let it fall. Let it all fall." Jon pressed his burning hand against the ice. The surface was warm, slick like living skin. "No," he whispered. "Not again." The voice laughed softly. "You cannot deny what you are. You have worn death and defied it. You have tasted power. Why crawl in the snow when you could rule the storm?" He closed his eyes. For a moment, he saw Rhaegal Valor's face, the proud knight's sorrowful gaze, the fire in his eyes before it turned to ruin. Then, beyond that, he saw himself, kneeling before the same stone, speaking the same words. "Pride," he murmured. "That's what you feed on. And what are you, if not proud?" He drew Longclaw. The blade gleamed white in the green light. "A man," he said, "and nothing more." He raised the sword and struck. The sound was like thunder breaking the world. Cracks spread through the ice, green light spilling forth in great sheets. The wall groaned, the sound of mountains dying. For an instant, Jon felt his body dissolve, his blood turning to fire, his bones to glass. The god's scream filled his mind. "You would destroy yourself to deny me? Fool! You are mine." "No," he gasped, forcing the words through the burning in his chest. "I am no one's." And then all was silence. When Davos and the others reached him, he lay half buried in snow before the shattered gate. The light had gone out of the wall. Its glow faded to dull ice once more. The mark upon Jon's hand was gone, leaving only a scar. His chest rose faintly. They carried him back to Castle Black, where Bran watched over him through the long night. When dawn came, Jon woke. His eyes were the same gray as before, but something within them had changed. "The god is gone," Bran said quietly. Jon looked toward the wall. "No, only sleeping, but not within me." He rose slowly, pain flickering through his limbs. Outside, the wind had calmed. The sky was clear, the snow untouched. "What now?" Davos asked. Jon looked northward, where the white wastes stretched forever. "Now," he said, "we keep watch." The wall stood, scarred but whole. The fires beneath the ice faded, and the green lights vanished from the sky. The north breathed again, wary, but alive. Yet the tale of that night passed quietly into rumor, whispered by sentries, half believed by maesters. They said Lord Jon Snow had spoken to the gods and lived. They said he had tamed the fire that could not die. But Jon himself spoke nothing of it. He returned to Winterfell a silent man, content to rule and endure. Still, on cold nights, when the aurora danced faint upon the northern horizon, Ghost would lift his head and growl softly at the wind. And Jon, sitting in the dark beside the fire, would feel for the scar on his hand and wonder what waited still beyond the wall, in the deep places where gods and men were born alike of pride and frost. And sometimes, when the night was longest, he would think he heard a voice again, faint as breath upon glass. "You have won a moment, but eternity is long." Then the wind would rise, and Winterfell would hold its silence. Winter lingered longer than memory could recall. Even the masters, with all their scrolls and calendars, could not name the last time the north had been so quiet, so cold, so watchful. Snow draped Winterfell like a burial shroud, muting sound and color alike. Yet the castle stood strong, its fires lit, its gates sealed against whatever things might stir beyond the wall's shadow. Jon Snow ruled from the hall of his forebears, though rule was never what he had sought. He was a man of duty, not desire, yet the weight of the north hung upon him like the snow upon the roofs. His face was older now, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. Sometimes, when the firelight dimmed, those who looked upon him saw not a man, but a remnant, a figure carved from ice and memory, barely warmed by mortal breath. The wall still stood, scarred but unbroken. The great wound Jon had struck through its heart had frozen over, leaving a jagged mark that glowed faintly on nights when the wind sang from the north. The maesters called it a wonder. The wildlings called it a warning. Jon called it silence. He rarely spoke of that night when the god beneath the ice had risen against him. He spoke even less of the voice that had once haunted his dreams. Yet at times, he would stand upon Winterfell's ramparts long after the fires had died, watching the northern lights flicker green and gold across the sky. And though his hand no longer burned, he would flex his fingers and feel, somewhere deep within, the faintest echo of a heartbeat, not his own. In the first moon of the new year, a raven came from the citadel. It carried word of strange omens in the west, earthquakes that split the coasts, rivers running backward for a night, fishermen who claimed to see fires moving beneath the sea. The maesters had sent their gray brothers to study the cause, but none had returned. Sansa read the letter aloud before the hearth, her voice calm though her hand trembled slightly. "It's the sea again," Davos muttered, pacing the hall. "The shard may have sunk, but perhaps its fire didn't die. Gods know what wakes in those depths." Bran's eyes gleamed in the firelight. The god beneath the ice was only one of many. The sea remembers older things still. The world was never one god, one truth. It was 1,000, each sleeping beneath the bones of men. Jon said nothing for a long while. Then, softly, "If the sea wakes, it will come north. It always does." They rode within the week. Jon led a smaller company this time. Davos, 2 of the free folk, and a score of Winterfell's best riders. Bran would not come, though his voice followed them through the ravens. "The sea is not like the ice," he had warned before they left. "It does not freeze, it devours. What you seek cannot be bound, only understood." Jon had met his brother's gaze. "Then I'll understand it." They rode through storm and frost, down to the coast, where the shivering sea met the cliffs. The air there was strange, heavy with salt and something metallic, like the taste of lightning. The water churned black and green beneath a sky veined with fire. They found the village of Hard Creek abandoned. Nets lay tangled on the shore, and boats drifted half-sunken near the rocks. The sea hissed as if alive. At night, the waves glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the tide. On the second night, a voice came with the wind. It was faint, almost human, and it spoke no words, only a sound of longing, like a song remembered from another life. The men grew restless. 2 fled before dawn. When the third tried to leave, the sea took him. He walked calmly into the surf, and the waves swallowed him without struggle. Jon watched it happen, powerless. The next morning, his company stood around the black water, grim and silent. "It's calling," Davos said. "Same as the god before. The same voice, maybe." "No," Jon said quietly. "This one's older." That night, Jon dreamt of the sea. He stood upon its surface, and beneath the waves he saw faces, Rhaegal Valor, the god of the ice, the children of the forest, men of the first age, all turning upward, mouths open in silent prayer. A light burned far below, bright and cold. From it came a single whisper, "You broke pride, but not hunger." He woke with a start. The surf outside glowed brighter than before, casting green light through the cracks of their shelter. The horses whinnied in fear. Then the ground shook. From the sea rose a pillar of fire and steam, twisting upward into the night. The men fell to their knees. Within the flame something moved, vast and sinuous, its shape only half seen. The air thrummed like a struck bell. Jon stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I know you," he said, though he could not name it. The fire answered in a voice like the crashing of waves. "You carry what was mine, the seed of flame, the blood of defiance. Return it, and the sea will sleep once more." Jon looked down at his hand. The scar glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the light. Davos shouted over the roar of wind. "Jon, what does it want?" "My pride," Jon said. "The last of it." The flame surged higher, curling into the sky. He could feel the heat on his face, yet it did not burn. For a moment, he thought of Winterfell, of Sansa's calm strength, Bran's haunted eyes, the people who had come to trust him. All of it would live or die by what he did now. He drew Longclaw and drove it into the ground. The blade hissed, turning white with heat. "Then take it," he whispered. The sea exploded in light. For an instant, he was nothing. No body, no thought, only flame and water meeting in endless battle. He felt the fire within him unravel, his pride, his pain, his name, all scattering into the vastness of the sea. The god's voice howled once, then vanished. When he opened his eyes, dawn was breaking. The sea was calm. The water lay black and still, reflecting the pale sky. The mark on his hand was gone. Davos stood nearby, his face streaked with ash. "You did it," he said, awe softening his voice. "By the gods, you did it." Jon turned toward the horizon, where the light of morning touched the waves. "No," he said quietly. "It did itself." They buried their dead on the cliffs above Hard Creek. No songs were sung, for none seemed fitting. As the last stone was laid, Jon stood alone by the edge of the sea. Ghost sat at his side, silent and watchful. Bran's ravens came at dusk, their wings black against the gold of the fading sun. Through them, Bran's voice reached him. "It sleeps again." "For how long?" Jon asked. "As long as men are humble," Bran replied. "Which is to say, not forever." Jon smiled faintly. "Then the world will never be quiet." "No," said the voice, soft as the wind. "Nor should it be." He turned away from the sea and began the long journey home. The cliffs behind him gleamed faintly in the twilight, and for a moment the waves caught the dying light, glimmering green like a serpent's eye. But when night fell, the glow faded, leaving only the sound of the tide and the whisper of the wind through the stones. The proud, immortal villain was gone, and so too the god that had worn him. Yet pride itself, pride eternal, pride human, remained, sleeping in the hearts of men, waiting for the next flame to stir it awake. The return from the sea was long and weary. Winter's hand had not loosened its grasp, and the north greeted Jon Snow with a silence so deep it seemed the land itself waited to see if he had truly returned. The men who rode with him spoke little, and those who had seen the sea's green fire avoided his eyes, as though afraid they might still reflect that otherworldly glow. When at last the towers of Winterfell rose from the snow, they looked less like stone and more like memory, a dream half remembered by a dying man. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the air smelled of ash and pine. Sansa stood upon the battlements as they entered, her hair bound in braids of silver and gold. She smiled to see her brother alive, though her eyes darkened when she saw the emptiness in his. "The sea sleeps again," Jon said as they met in the courtyard. "For now." Sansa touched his arm. "And what of you?" "I sleep too," he answered, "but my dreams are loud." That night, the hall filled with feasting and laughter, though neither joy nor wine could warm Jon's heart. He listened to the songs, to the stories of their victory, and felt none of it belonged to him. He had faced gods, slain shadows, and drowned his pride in the sea, and yet he felt less alive than the men who toasted him. He was no longer the man who had ridden from Winterfell all those months ago. When the feast ended, he walked alone through the quiet corridors. Ghost padded beside him, silent as the snow falling beyond the walls. The halls were warm, yet Jon felt the chill deep within his bones. In the stillness, he heard a whisper, not the voice of the god, nor of Rhaegal Valor, but his own. "You have won peace, but peace has no place for men like you." He found himself drawn to the crypts. The air below was cold and damp, smelling of earth and stone. The torches guttered as he passed the statues of his forebears, their stony faces gazing into eternity. He stopped before Ned Stark's likeness, snow-dusted and stern, and knelt. "I did what I could," he said softly, "but I don't know if it was right." The silence gave no answer, but something in it felt almost kind. In the days that followed, peace held, fragile, uncertain, yet real. The rivers thawed. The small folk began planting again. Ravens brought word that the seas no longer burned and the coasts were quiet. Children played in the courtyards without fear. Yet beneath this calm, a new unease stirred, a sense that something precious had been lost, though none could name it. Bran spent long hours in the Godswood, his body frail, his mind wandering through dreams no man could follow. When Jon came to him one morning, he found his brother pale as snow, his eyes rolled white. The red leaves rustled though there was no wind. "Bran?" Jon knelt beside him. "What do you see?" Bran's voice came faint and distant, as if from across a great chasm. "I see the threads of the world. Fire, ice, flesh, pride. They are all the same thread, woven and unmade again and again. We have only cut one knot. The pattern continues." Jon frowned. "Then what must I do?" "Live," Bran said simply, "until the next knot forms." Years passed like drifting snow. Sansa ruled wisely, her words carrying weight across the north and beyond. Under her hand, Winterfell became not only a fortress, but a haven, a place where scars of war and fire healed slowly into strength. Yet she often looked northward, her thoughts straying to her brother, who had grown quiet as the hills. Jon spent his days among the wildlings, rebuilding the ruined forts along the wall, hunting, patrolling, teaching the young the old ways. He no longer heard voices, but sometimes, when he stood before the icy wound in the wall where pride and flame had once met, he felt something stir, a pulse, faint but steady, like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the ice. He would stand there for hours, his breath clouding the air, his eyes on the endless white beyond. Ghost never left his side. The people whispered of him now as they once had of the immortal night. Some called him the Watcher in the north, others the Silent Wolf. They said no man had seen him age, though the winters came and went. He seemed carved from the very frost that he guarded. One such winter, a wandering maester named Corin arrived at Winterfell with tales of strange lights in the far north. "Not green this time," he told Sansa, his voice trembling. "Gold, bright as dawn. The wildlings say they rise from the old shrines, fire blooming beneath the snow." Sansa listened, silent. When he finished, she dismissed him with gifts and food for the road. That night, she climbed the tower and sent a raven north. It found Jon 3 days later. The message was brief. "The lights have returned." He burned the parchment after reading it. For a long while he stood by the campfire, listening to the wind sigh through the ruins of the Watch. The aurora shimmered faintly above, streaks of gold against the black. Ghost lifted his head and whined softly. "I know," Jon murmured, stroking the direwolf's fur. "I thought it was over too." He saddled his horse before dawn and rode north, beyond the wall, where no path remained. The snow grew deeper, the cold sharper, until even the breath froze in his beard. Yet he rode on, drawn by a light that pulsed faintly on the horizon. When he reached the frozen valley where once the Night's King had fallen, he found the snow melted away. The ground was bare, steaming faintly. In the center of the valley stood a single stone, black, smooth, and warm to the touch. Upon it burned a mark like an eye, bright gold in the dim light. Jon approached slowly, his hand tightening on Longclaw. The stone thrummed beneath his boots. Then, faintly, a whisper rose, not from within the earth, but from within himself. There will always be gods, and men to fight them. He drew his sword and drove it into the stone. The valley erupted in light, gold, pure and blinding. The sound was not of thunder, but of breath, as if the world itself exhaled. When the light faded, the mark was gone. The stone lay cracked and cold once more. Jon stood there a long time, his face calm, his eyes distant. Ghost pressed against his leg, silent and still. Then he turned his horse southward. Behind him, the snow began to fall again, gentle and slow, covering the valley, the cracks, and the traces of light alike. In Winterfell, years later, they would tell tales of how the last of the Starks rode into the far north and never returned. Some said he became a spirit of the snows, watching forever over the wall. Others swore they had seen him walking at dusk along the battlements, gray cloak trailing, ghostly direwolf at his side. Sansa never denied such stories, nor did she confirm them. When asked, she would only say, "The North remembers." And beneath the aurora, when the lights danced gold or green or silver above the world, the people would lift their eyes and whisper prayers, not to gods of fire or ice, but to the man who had walked among them, carried their pride, and vanished into legend. For though the gods may rise and fall, and pride may burn or freeze, the memory of Jon Snow, the last watcher, the reluctant godslayer, endured, bound not in flame nor in ice, but in the hearts of those who remembered what it meant to be human. And far to the north, beneath the eternal snow, a wolf's howl echoed, long, mournful, and proud. The years passed, slow and heavy as the turning of the stars. The wars of men dwindled to stories told by firesides, and the lords of the south forgot the name of Winterfell. But the north remembered. The north always did. Its snows covered graves and castles alike, yet never the memory of those who had stood against the dark. They said the seasons themselves had grown strange since the days of Jon Snow. Winters came colder, yet shorter. Summers burned bright, yet faded fast. The maesters at Old Town wrote of imbalance, of forces unseen. In their gray halls they whispered of a pattern older than any kingdom, a dance between fire and frost that no man could end. Far from their libraries, beyond the reach of crowns and councils, the North lived as it always had, by the hearth, by the hunt, by the strength of its memory. Yet even there, tales lingered of the watcher in the snow, the man who had walked beyond the wall and never returned. On nights when the aurora shone, children would climb to the ramparts to see if the pale wolf's howl might be heard upon the wind. Sansa grew old beneath the weight of peace. Her hair turned to silver, her eyes to glass. She ruled long and wisely until the North became a land of quiet prosperity, yet her gaze often drifted northward. In her last years, she spent her evenings by the godswood, staring at the red leaves as if listening for a voice that no longer spoke. When death came, it came softly. She was found one morning by the heart tree, her head resting upon its roots, her face peaceful. The people mourned her as they would a mother. They buried her beside her kin, beneath stone carved with a single phrase, "The North remembers." The castle endured, as all old things do. The seasons turned again, and though generations rose and fell, Winterfell's gray stones stood eternal. But the wall was not eternal. Time and storm gnawed at its edges. The ancient frost grew brittle. The scar left by Jon Snow's sword still marked its heart, a frozen wound that glowed faintly when the night sky turned green. In the 3rd century after his vanishing, the watchers on the wall began to see shapes moving far to the north, tall and silent, outlined against the aurora. They did not approach, nor did they flee. Some said they were spirits. Others swore they were men reborn in the ice. The old fear stirred again, though none could name its cause. Then, one morning, the wind changed. The sky was clear, but the air carried a sound, a deep, low note like the beating of some vast heart beneath the world. The snow upon the wall's summit trembled. From the north, a mist rose, curling and coiling, pale as breath upon glass. Within it, the light shimmered gold, then green, then blue. It was not flame, nor was it frost, but something between. The watchmen gathered upon the ramparts. They saw no army, no god, no beast, only the mist, pulsing in rhythm with that distant heartbeat. And then, through the haze, a shape appeared, a man. He walked slowly, each step stirring the snow without leaving tracks. His cloak was white as bone, his hair streaked with silver. At his side padded a dire wolf, its fur pale as moonlight, its eyes bright with the calm of eternity. In the man's hand hung a sword wrapped in old leather. Its hilt gleamed faintly beneath the northern lights. The watchmen dared not speak. They felt no fear, only a weight, as though the world itself held its breath. The man stopped at the base of the wall and looked up. For a moment, the air seemed to still. Then he lifted his gaze toward the towers, and though the distance was great, those who met his eyes felt their hearts falter. Gray eyes, cold and kind, as old as the snow itself. He turned then and vanished into the mist. The wolf followed. The glow faded. The wind rose again. And though the wall stood unbroken, the men upon it knew they had seen something that would outlast them all. That night, the northern lights burned brighter than any living soul could remember. The colors danced in the sky, green and gold, crimson and silver, twisting like fire reflected in ice. Across the land, from White Harbor to the Shadow Tower, men woke to the sound of a single distant howl. It carried through forests and over rivers, through stone and dream, a call both mournful and proud. In Winterfell's crypts, the candles flickered and died. The air grew warm for the first time in centuries, and a whisper stirred among the statues. The North remembers. Years later, travelers told of a figure seen wandering the far tundra, a rider upon a pale horse, followed by a ghostly wolf. They said he spoke little, asked nothing, gave no name. When storms threatened, they vanished. When wildlings quarreled, he appeared among them, silent as falling snow, his mere presence stilling the fight. No one saw him eat, nor sleep, nor age. But when the lights returned to the sky, brighter than before, they said he was there, standing upon the edge of the world, watching. The Meisters dismissed such tales as northern superstition. The South had no patience for ghosts. But among the free folk and the children of the frost, the story endured. They said the man had carried a god once, and by breaking it had become something greater, not divine nor mortal, but a balance between both. He was called many names, the Pale Lord, the Keeper of the Flame, the Last Wolf. Yet the oldest of them, the one whispered with reverence by firesides when the snow howled outside, was the simplest of all, Jon Snow. So the ages turned, empires rose and crumbled, kings burned, thrones were forged and shattered, the world forgot its gods, then made new ones, and still the North endured. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the aurora burned fierce across the heavens, hunters swore they saw a lone rider upon the horizon, watching the world he had once bled to save. He never came closer, nor farther. He was simply there, as constant as winter, as silent as memory. And though no man ever heard his voice again, his presence was enough to remind them. Pride may rise, gods may fall, but the heart of the North, the heart of men who dared to fight both fire and fate, would never fade. For beyond the wall, where the stars touch the endless snow, a wolf's howl still carried through the dark, joined by the whisper of an old, eternal vow. The North remembers, the North endures, and in that promise lay the peace of a world forever balanced between pride and humility, between life and legend, between the fading warmth of men and the eternal cold of the gods. The story of the proud immortal villain had ended, but the song of the North would never die.